My name is Claire Bennett, and the moment my husband walked back into our house after disappearing to Europe for a month, he stopped breathing like he'd been hit in the chest. He stood frozen in the doorway, suitcase slipping from his hand, eyes darting from the spotless living room to the neatly labeled boxes stacked along the wall. Our daughter was asleep in her bassinet by the window, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. The house smelled like lemon cleaner instead of stale takeout and formula. And me? I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I wasn't even looking at him the way I used to, like he was the center of my gravity. "No, no," Derek whispered, his voice breaking as he took a step inside. "This can't be happening." I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, steady for the first time in weeks. "It already did," I said quietly. But to understand why that moment felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another, you have to go back to the night he told me he needed space. It was just 4 weeks after I'd given birth. The stitches still pulled when I stood up too fast. My back ached from hours of rocking a screaming newborn. I hadn't slept more than 90 minutes at a time since we'd brought Emma home from the hospital. Every mirror in the house showed a version of me I barely recognized. Pale, swollen, hair tied into a desperate knot. Derek sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone while I paced the floor with Emma pressed against my shoulder. "I can't breathe in this house anymore," he finally said. First, I thought he meant the baby's crying, or the laundry piled in corners, or the fact that we hadn't had a real conversation since she was born. But then he looked up with that strange, calm expression, the one he used when he'd already made up his mind. "I need a reset," he said. "The guys are doing a month in Europe, Spain, Italy, maybe Greece. I think I should go." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded so absurd that my brain refused to file it under reality. "You're kidding," I said. "Right?" He shook his head slowly. "Claire, I'm losing myself. All we talk about is diapers and feedings. You're emotional all the time. I need to clear my head before I start resenting everything." The word everything landed like a slap. I tightened my hold on Emma as she whimpered, sensing the tension in the room. "I just had your baby," I whispered. "I can barely walk without pain. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten a full meal in days. And you're talking about a vacation." "It's not a vacation," he snapped. "It's mental health. People do this all the time. Not people with newborns." I wanted to scream. "Not husbands who promise to be partners. Can you at least wait a few months?" I asked. "Or go for a week. Your mom could come help. If we could figure something out." He was already shaking his head. "The flights are booked. I leave Friday." Friday. 3 days away. I remember standing there in the yellow light of our kitchen, realizing that my husband had planned his escape while I was still learning how to hold our daughter without feeling like I might break her. He kissed Emma's forehead before he left, told me he loved me, and promised he'd call every day. Then he climbed into a rideshare with a carry-on bag and a grin that didn't belong to a man leaving his family behind. I stood on the porch long after the taillights disappeared, Emma's tiny heartbeat fluttering against mine. That was the night something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let the truth in. If life got hard, Derek didn't stay. He ran. The first night after Derek left, Emma cried for 4 straight hours. Not the soft, needy whimper I had learned to soothe with rocking and humming, but a raw, desperate scream that seemed to tear through both of us. I paced the living room barefoot at 3 o'clock in the morning, whispering apologies to a baby who didn't understand words but could feel every tremor of fear in my chest. My body still felt like it didn't belong to me. The doctor had warned me about postpartum recovery, the bleeding, the swelling, the unpredictable waves of emotion, but no one had prepared me for how lonely it would feel when the person who promised to stand beside me chose to disappear instead. Derek texted me the next afternoon. A photo of a beach. Blue water, bright umbrellas, a glass sweating in the sun. "Wish you were here," the caption read, followed by a winking emoji. I stared at the screen while Emma slept on my shoulder, milk soaking through my shirt. Wish I were there. I hadn't showered in 2 days. I typed back, she barely slept. I'm exhausted. 3 dots appeared then vanished. His reply finally came. Try to relax. Stress isn't good for the baby. I laughed so hard I started crying. The days blurred together after that. Feeding, changing, rocking, washing bottles, trying to remember whether I'd taken my vitamins. Sometimes I'd sit on the edge of the bed and realize I couldn't recall the last time I'd eaten anything besides crackers. On the 5th day, his mother showed up unannounced. Linda Bennett swept into the house wearing a perfume cloud and a look of mild disappointment. Well, she said, glancing at the sink full of dishes. I thought motherhood would suit you better. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I haven't had much help, I said carefully. She waved a manicured hand. Men need freedom, Claire. Derek has always been sensitive. If you smother him with all this, she gestured vaguely toward the bassinet, he'll only pull further away. I wanted to ask her what kind of freedom a newborn baby was supposed to have. Instead, I nodded because nodding was easier than arguing when you were running on 2 hours of sleep. She stayed for 20 minutes, criticized the laundry, suggested formula instead of breastfeeding because it was less dramatic. Then she left with a promise to check in next week. I stood in the doorway after she drove off, Emma bundled against my chest, and felt something inside me harden. That evening, I forgot to lock the front gate. I was sitting on the porch steps trying to breathe through another crying spell when a soft voice said, Honey, you look like you're about to tip over. I looked up to see Mrs. Evelyn Carter from next door, a retired nurse in her 70s who always wore sneakers and carried herself like she still had places to be. Before I could protest, she took Emma from my arms with practiced gentleness. You go shower, she said, and eat something that isn't beige. I obeyed like she'd given me oxygen. When I came back 20 minutes later, she had made me scrambled eggs and toast. Emma was asleep against her shoulder. You're not meant to do this alone, Evelyn said, meeting my eyes. And you're not weak for needing help. But you do need a plan. A plan, I repeated. She nodded. Support, legal information, financial clarity. Start writing things down. Dates, messages, expenses. Not because you want to punish him, but because you need to protect yourself and that baby. That night, after she left, I opened a notebook and wrote the date Derek had gone. Then I kept writing. For the first time since he'd walked out the door, I stopped waiting for him to come back and save me. I started figuring out how to save myself. The first thing I did was stop crying in front of my phone. For nearly a week after Derek left, I had been sending him long messages in the middle of the night, updates about Emma, about my pain, about how scared I felt. I told myself I was keeping him informed. The truth was, I was still trying to make him care. On the 8th day, I reread our entire message thread. Photos of tapas, a blurry shot of Derek laughing with his college friends, a selfie from a rooftop bar with the caption needed this. And then my texts, paragraphs of pleading disguised as conversation. Something inside me went quiet. I didn't delete the messages. I printed them. Mrs. Evelyn had driven me to the public library that morning so I could use the printer and the free legal resource desk. She held Emma while I fed wrinkled sheets of paper into a plastic folder, my hands shaking less with each page. You're not being dramatic, she said softly. You're being prepared. Prepared. The word felt strange on my tongue, like trying on a coat I'd never thought would fit me. That afternoon, I scheduled a consultation with a family attorney downtown. I wasn't filing for divorce, not yet. I just needed to understand what my life would look like if Derek's version of marriage, where he could step out whenever things got hard, was the only version he was capable of. The attorney, a calm woman named Rachel Green, didn't judge me. She asked practical questions. Whose name is on the house? Both. The savings account? Mostly his. Has he contributed to childcare since the birth? I shook my head. She nodded slowly and slid a yellow legal pad toward me. Start documenting everything. His travel dates, his expenses, any communication where he acknowledges leaving you alone postpartum. This isn't about revenge. It's about leverage and safety. Leverage. Another new word. That night, after Emma finally drifted to sleep, I opened our banking app and felt my stomach drop. Derek had spent nearly $8,000 in 2 weeks. Hotels, restaurants, excursions. He hadn't even noticed the hospital bills still sitting unpaid in our mailbox. My hands didn't tremble this time. I transferred enough money into a new household account to cover rent, groceries, diapers, and emergency savings. I left a clear digital note explaining the move, not hiding, not stealing, protecting. Over the next days, I began rearranging more than just finances. I created a feeding schedule that gave me 2 predictable windows of rest. I joined an online postpartum support group filled with women who understood endurance without glamorizing it. I took Emma on short walks around the block, feeling the sun on my face like a reminder that the world still existed beyond our living room. One afternoon, I stood in our bedroom staring at the framed photos on Derek's nightstand. Our wedding day, a beach vacation from 3 years ago, him grinning beside a barbecue grill. I picked them up one by one and placed them in a box. Not out of rage, but out of clarity. I could no longer fall asleep beside a curated version of a man who had proven he would abandon me when reality got inconvenient. I didn't throw the photos away. I wasn't trying to erase our history. I was simply making space for the truth. By the time Derek texted, "Booked my flight home. Can't wait to reset us," I had already finished printing the last of our bank statements. I set them neatly on the dining table. For the first time since he left, I wasn't afraid of his return. I was ready for it. Derek chose a Tuesday afternoon to come home. Not a weekend, not an evening when the house might be dim and forgiving. A bright, ordinary Tuesday when sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors and every detail could be seen clearly. I heard the rideshare door slam before his key even turned in the lock. Emma was asleep in her bassinet beside the window, her tiny fists curled like seashells. The dishwasher hummed softly. A pot of soup simmered on the stove. For the first time since she'd been born, the house felt stable. When the door opened, Derek stepped in with a tan he hadn't earned and a smile that died the second he looked around. His suitcase hit the floor. Boxes lined the wall, labeled in my handwriting: winter clothes, college books, tax records. On the dining table were 3 neat stacks of paper held down by a ceramic bowl. Calendar pages marked with red circles, printed screenshots of his messages, bank statements with highlighted charges, and a typed letter from Rachel Green's office outlining custody guidelines and financial obligations, not filed but very real. And on top of everything, a single handwritten page. He picked it up with fingers that suddenly didn't seem so steady. "You left me at my weakest," he read aloud. "I learned how strong I had to become without you." His breath caught. "No, no," he whispered, shaking his head like he could physically dislodge the meaning. This isn't fair. I told you I needed space. I thought you understood." I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded. "I understood," I said. "You needed freedom more than you needed us." He flinched. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft rhythm of Emma's breathing. "She's bigger," he said, finally moving closer to the bassinet as if approaching a stranger. "She looks different." "That's what happens when babies grow," I replied. "Even when their fathers aren't around to see it." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a man trying to outrun something invisible. "I called," he protested. "I checked in. You never said it was this bad." "I said I was exhausted," I answered. "I said I was scared. You told me to relax and sent me photos of sangria." Color drained from his face. "I didn't realize." He began, then stopped. 'Cause realization was exactly what he had avoided for an entire month. His eyes landed on the attorney's letter again. "You talked to a lawyer?" he asked, voice rising. "I talked to information," I corrected. "There's a difference." He sank into a chair like his legs had forgotten their job. You're not actually going to take Emma away from me, he said, more plea than question. I'm not taking anything, I said quietly. I'm setting boundaries, something our marriage apparently never had. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since I'd met him, Derek Bennett looked small. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the version of himself he'd carefully protected, the charming guy who could talk his way out of responsibility, had nowhere left to hide. I thought if I got one last month to myself, I'd come back ready, he admitted, staring at his hands. I didn't think you'd change. I didn't think I'd survive, I said. But here we are. Emma stirred, then a soft whimper escaping her lips. Instinctively, I stepped forward, and so did he. We froze inches apart. Can I? He asked, nodding toward her. I hesitated. Then I stepped back. He lifted his daughter awkwardly, like he was holding both hope and guilt at the same time. Tears slid down his cheeks before he could stop them. I was a coward, he whispered into her hair. I thought I could pause fatherhood. Pause being a husband. I didn't realize what that would cost. I didn't answer because apologies were only the beginning. Derek didn't sleep that first night. I could hear him moving around the living room long after Emma and I had gone to bed, opening drawers, closing them again, pacing softly like he was afraid the house might reject him if he made too much noise. 3 o'clock in the morning, Emma began to cry. Not loudly, just a restless, searching sound. For weeks, that sound had meant my body would jolt awake before my mind could catch up. But this time I stayed still. I waited. Through the thin wall, I heard Derek's footsteps, a pause, then the creak of the bassinet. His voice came next, low, uncertain. Hey, little girl. It's okay. Daddy's here. There was fumbling, a diaper bag zipper, the muted clink of a bottle warming in the kitchen. Emma's cry softened. Tears slid into my ears as I stared at the ceiling. Not because everything was suddenly forgiven, but because for the first time since she'd been born, I wasn't alone. The next morning, we sat across from each other at the dining table that had become a battlefield. I know saying sorry isn't enough, Derek said. His eyes were red, his posture stripped of its usual confidence. I don't even know where to start fixing what I broke. You don't fix it, I replied calmly. You rebuild it slowly and only if you're willing to do the work. He nodded immediately, like he'd been waiting for instructions. No more disappearing, I continued. Individual therapy, couples counseling, full transparency with money, shared night shifts with Emma. And your mother doesn't get to decide what our marriage looks like anymore. He swallowed hard. Okay, he said. All of it. I'll do all of it. I watched him carefully, searching for the old defensiveness, the easy charm he used to smooth over consequences. It wasn't there. In the weeks that followed, Derek did things I had once begged him to do, not with dramatic speeches but with quiet consistency. He learned how to hold Emma so she settled faster. He memorized her feeding schedule. He showed up to therapy appointments, even on days he looked like he'd rather run. One afternoon, I came home from a postpartum support meeting to find him on the living room floor surrounded by burp cloths and parenting books. He looked up sheepishly. She spit up on chapter 4, he said. I almost smiled. Trust didn't return in a rush. Came in fragments. The first full night of sleep he insisted I take while he stayed up. The way he stopped scrolling his phone during dinner and actually listened. The moment he told his mother, firmly but respectfully, that our decisions were no longer open for her commentary. Real change is unglamorous. It looks like repetition, humility, and choosing responsibility on days when no one is watching. One night, as we stood side by side over Emma's crib, Derek reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the future finally felt like something we might build together instead of something I had to survive alone. If you're listening to this and you've ever been left to carry more than your share, in marriage and parenthood in life, I hope you remember this. Love is not proven by how much pain you can endure. It's proven by how honestly you face the truth and what you're willing to change once you see it. this story touched you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. And if you believe in second chances built on real accountability, consider staying with us for more stories that honor strength, dignity, and hope. The end.